stuff aligning with that. So basically what we're going to be sharing today is toddlerhood before, during, and after. And so I guess toddlerhood from the indigenous perspective, but as well touch upon the Western perspective too. So we're going to be able to look at both of those worlds and kind of combine the information that way. Um, I am Plains Cree from Musqueam Territory, Samson Cree Nation, located in Treaty 6. Um, so a lot of the knowledge that I'll be sharing comes from elders throughout Plains Territory, stemming from Northern Alberta, across Canada to down south. Um, and so a lot of this knowledge was combined from my father over the years. And then as well, um, just taking that indigenous knowledge, but at the same time learning and growing with that. Um, and then a lot of it too is from personal experience. Being a father, I have three children. So just kind of, I guess, infusing the knowledge with indigenous knowledge, personal knowledge, but as well as Western philosophy. Um, so that's the take of where this knowledge is coming from the Plains Cree people of Musqueam. So with that, as Manisha gets the information loaded, I will read along with you guys from my side. I got to set up my stuff too on this side, so I am all good to go here. But in the meantime, I kind of don't want to start, but without giving away too much information. But just a little bit of more about my background, I guess. We'll jump into that. I was a certified addictions counselor for 8 years. Um, and then from there, I was in leadership for Samson Cree Nation. After that, I did a lot of program creation for child and family services, for education institutes like Nietzsche Institute, and programming that really helps the whole family dynamic from the youngest child to the oldest elder. So traditional parenting, a little bit of all that. So pulling all those tools together, I jumped into my Indigenous social work 2 years ago, and I'm continuing on to the degree. So just a lot of work over the years in different fields, but for the most part, it's in the expertise and areas of helping people, working with people, right? So I believe we are ready to go, Manisha, and we are getting jumped. We're going to jump into this. So, title: Toddlerhood Before, During, and After: An Indigenous Perspective Meets Western, presented by Jerry Saddleback Jr. So we'll jump on to the next one, Manisha. So pretty much what we're going to be going over is the introduction, an Indigenous perspective, our Plains Cree ceremonies and child rearing, why this topic is important to me, and then we'll go over the Cree lullaby. Yeah, next. So introduction, toddlerhood is a part of the angel-like state, which takes place between conception and the age of 7. The Big Dipper is a reminder in the night sky of our sacred number 7, as well as our understanding of 7 generations. Our stories align with teachings over and over again, how we will discuss this timeline and how it relates to toddlerhood. Um, so when we talk about toddlerhood from the indigenous perspective, and then it by us using the terminology angel-like stage, um, this is one of the most sacredest stages for our indigenous children. It's the age where they are sponges. They learn lots. They're growing. They're developing. So very crucial stages. Um, we will jump on to the next one, and I'll touch more deeply on that. So basically, um, Off the chapter 4 of lifespan development, it defines the term toddler as toddling, the unsteady gait of babies who are learning to walk, especially around 2 to 3 years old. So, from Western philosophy, the way they kind of span on toddlerhood is in those ages. So, a lot of times we know it as the terrible twos. From the indigenous perspective, we know it really as the wondrous stage. So a lot of during this time, they're doing a lot of just trying to figure out um, what is around them in their environment, right? So in Plains Cree, this is known as Papao Musti Jisiu. I might have butchered that, but Papao Mochisiu. I think that's how I pronounce it. So basically, he or she walks a little, small child, right? So, an indigenous perspective, the Cree teachings remind us that from the moment of conception, the age of 7, this is the angel-like stage. Creator has given our children the ability to travel back home during this time frame and suddenly or eventually. Because this stage is so precious, we are taught the importance of child rearing through conception, how to love, to care, to be gentle, to be kind, to be supportive, to be compassionate, and how to be there for our partner. So, the second sentence, Creator has given our children the ability to travel back home during this time. Um, we are told that our children they're such powerful beings in this state, which is why we know it as the angel state. Um, and being so that they have the ability to foresee into the future um, of the lifespan that they will have, of how they will affect the parents, the children, the other siblings that they might have, society as a whole, the lifestyle that they have. Um, so, because Creator gave them this ability to foresee, he also gave them that ability that if they so choose to want to come home, or they foresee something that they don't agree with, they have that ability to come home sooner. And there's different terminologies for this. Some of it could be say sudden infant death syndrome. um, some of it you just don't know why, right? And so it could be, a random disease that pops up. It could be an accident. It could be something that just happens out of the ordinary. And so, in our understanding, we believe that they have that ability, right? So, I just wanted to touch up on that, and that's what they mean by angel-like stage is um, they can go at any time, but at the same time the knowledge that we'll be sharing with them in this angel-like stage from conception. So the moment that we know that child is in the mother's womb, we change our voice. We start talking to it kind. We start talking to it differently, um, having nothing but positive energy around that child in the womb. Um, and we start speaking the language. We start singing the lullabies. We start sharing the stories. And so as that child grows throughout conception to 7, they're able to obtain the information, and moving forth 8 and onwards, that information that is foundational indigenous knowledge sticks with that child, right? And so how you raise that child, how you care for that child, all of those teachings um, are ingrained in that child's upbringing, and so it's able to stay with them, right, that much longer, um, for the rest of their lives, right? So we'll move on to the next one. So here's a quick glimpse. Manisha, you can jump onto the next one. So this next one is a quick look at the indigenous perspective. Um, there's so much taking place within this time frame from 1 to 7, or from inception to 7. Um, for every little thing that the child does from conception to 7, and even onward, we still practice this. we have something in Plains Cree that we practice our berry ceremonies. So every new accomplish, they say call for the first time. They say dad, they say mom, they say nikawi, notawi, all of these different things of first times, and we offer a berry ceremony. So um, continuously the berries are coming out because we're trying to honor that child. We're making that offering to Creator, to all of the universe, that they can continue to help this child continue to grow, right? And so that's a major important part of our indigenous practices. And then the syllabics lullaby, definitely a crucial piece in the language development. Um, my children are 13, 11, and 7, and they know the lullaby, the Plains Cree Syllabics lullaby. Um, and so as you know it, as you learn it, it becomes foundational as you go to start speaking the language, as you go to start learning the language. Um, and it's a tune that just stays in your head. It's continuous. You just know it. For me, when I write out the syllabics, I resort back to the lullaby, and I could jump through all of the syllabics just by having that as a foundational tool. It was something that I did for the children when they were in their mother's womb, um, and then when they were born, um, and then something that I still do. Um, whether I'm singing them a lullaby, whether I'm comforting them, whether we're relaxing, and then every once in a while I will test them to recite the lullaby to me. Um, and I just find that as you share that information with them, it becomes locked in their brain, right? And unknowingly, they have the language with them, right? Because they have a foundational tool that they can build on whenever it comes to the language, right? First steps, that was something we always honored. We had a ceremony when the child would do its first steps. And we have different terminology, in these areas, right? So the grieving process is such a huge thing. It aligns with traditional parenting. Um, and in the beginning, when the child is first born and they come out of the womb, we often hear that child cry. And to our understanding from traditional parenting is, as that child cries, they're mourning to be close to be with that mother, to be safe in the womb. And that's when grief starts. That's when the mourning process starts. So when you coddle too much, when you spoil too much, um, these practices follow them into adulthood. And so as adults, we wonder why sometimes we struggle when we go through certain losses. Um, Sometimes when we go through certain losses, if we were spoiled, essentially you need those same supports in order for you to get through that grief. And if you don't have those same supports, if you're a lot of times if you're alone in your grief and you're suffering and you're going through your hardship of what you're dealing with, um, that's where self-soothing comes into place. And so if you're always, soothed as a child, right away, then as an adult, you would start to see how that transitions into adulthood is, um, you would need someone to soothe you. You would need someone to coddle you. And if you don't have that, that grief's going to hit you that much harder. It's going to stay with you that much longer. It's going to be that much more difficult for you to grieve and to come through that process, right? And grieving in anything from losing a vehicle to losing a job to losing a house to a relationship, to losing a loved one, there's so many different levels of that grief, right? And so it's crucial that in those first stages, um, that you really pay attention to the child, that you don't over spoil, um, you don't over soothe to the point where it's like, oh, let them self soothe, eventually they'll stop crying. Because that could also be detrimental too, to the point where you forget about the child and you just, oh, they're crying, just, let them cry. Um, that could be detrimental. So a lot of times when a baby's crying nonstop, they tell you, try to calm the child down, um, and so you build that relationship with that child, and as that child grows, they're going to take those skills with them into adulthood, right? And so traditional parenting, we've always known that grief is a big part of that, and loss, and helping the child to get through those processes because they're definitely foundational tools for life. The first laugh, again, we have a big ceremony for that. Our relatives down south actually have a huge, huge ceremony. So it's kind of like, don't make the baby laugh. Don't make the baby laugh. It's like not that you're shushing people to not make the child laugh. It's just it comes with a big sacrifice and a big commitment to throw that first big feast because the child laughed, right? And who is the person that made that child laugh? And it's their family that actually has to hold this big feast and invite everybody over, right? So there's that. The spot behind the neck. One of the interesting things is if you have a groove behind the neck, behind like the back of your neck, if it kind of goes in, you could tell if a child is spoiled, right? And whereas if it's just kind of solid all the way in the back across, then they're more sharing, they're more kind, they're more compassionate, they're more willing to not be, I guess, offended, but to be more um, just a more kinder spirit, right? And so if they have that groove and you know that they're spoiled, um, that's where traditional parenting comes into place. That okay, this child's a little spoiled. We got to develop this now. We have that short time frame of inception to seven. So we got to work with this child and teach this child to share more, teach this child to be kind more, work on if there is any aggression or if this child's ability to listen, right? And so that's when it would be that constant repetition of working with this child, right? So there was ways we knew um, as the children grew, right? So the soft spot on the head, that's another big one. I think it's like for the first year, there's a big soft spot on the head. So that is totally off limits to touch the child on the head, and it's known as a very sacred spot. So that's a big one. The swing. So aside from when the baby comes out, we would develop these things called the moss bag. And the moss bag, essentially, what that did is you wrapped up the child, and the child got that same experience of being in the womb. And then the swing, there's ceremony, attached to the swing, do's and don'ts with the swing that you never just leave the child in the swing. You're always in attendance, right? While you're there with the child, right? And so there's those teachings. The hair. So our children, we wouldn't cut their hair. However, our down south relatives, what they would do is after the first year, they would cut the child's hair. And so essentially what that would do was it would grow back stronger, right? And so those are different teachings that they included there. Babies looking under their legs. If you see a baby looking under their legs, just run. Just just please run. Just joking. No, that's Cree humor. You'll always see all the aunties or all the women. If a child starts to look under their legs, um, it's kind of their hint as to who's going to be pregnant next. So basically, essentially, they're looking under their legs to see who's pregnant. They're trying to find a playmate. They want to play with somebody. Um, and if they do that and they look at you and you make eye contact with them, surprisingly, those women become pregnant or else they're already holding child, right? So it's quite interesting. Like a lot of times, a good percentage of the time, the baby's right with who they're looking at, who they're making eye contact with. So all the aunties and cousins will be like, "Oh, baby's looking at you." So it's kind of a Cree humor, right? And it's followed into indigenous beliefs throughout Indian country, right? Kind of the same beliefs align. Uh, baby's natures around baby's nature around pregnant women. Um, Sometimes you can know by the way a child is interacting with the mother, like if the mother is pregnant with a child, sometimes how that the child is interacting with that mother can already give you insight that, oh, I think she's going to have a boy, or oh, I think she's going to have a girl, just by how the child is reacting, right? So the first gathering ceremony, sweat ceremony, a lot of our people still believe this. It's talking to the child. It's speaking all of the prayers and the wishes that you wish for the child. So the child is carried by everybody within that ceremony, and they're supposed to share information with that child, right? The prayers and the well wishes that they want for that child. So that's one of the ceremonies that they still practice. Another ceremony is the tea dance ceremony. So it's a big gathering and giveaway, and then as well as dance and ceremony, celebrating in the child's first year, but at the same time putting forth prayer for this child, right? Another one is going back to children at play. It was always important that we would observe children at play, especially if there was more than one. And while we would do this, we already had a good idea with who these children were going to be in our circular encampment in our societies. Uh, so if these children were flinging to a one individual who was kind of calling the shots, chances are that the individual is a born leader. And so what they would do is there may be one or two, maybe three, a couple children that had that gift to just naturally lead, and they would build those children up. Um, the parents would build them up, the community would build them up, and a lot of times these children held those responsibilities, the leadership role, and then some of them, their abilities would transform into certain things. You know, maybe this one was a leader, but they were more close and attached to nature. And so they became that expert in how to work with, nature and Mother Earth. Then another one, maybe it was food, and then another one, maybe it had to do specifically with our governance structures, our justice structures, the way we functioned as a society. So there was there was those types of um, things that we looked at as these children grew and how we tried to develop them. Um, and the interesting thing, I think it's Japan that still uses this, or it's China. Um, but that's what they do. They will observe children at play. They'll put them through different processes. So let's see if this individual works with math and they're good at numbers. And if they are, let's develop that. Let's see if this one's good with sports activities. If they are, let's develop that. Let's see if this one's good at, making food. Let's develop that. And so that's what, as Indigenous peoples, it was so important that we always observed our children at child play, because it was these skills that were gonna, I guess, benefit them in life, right? Um, so with that being said, accidents and more accidents, we'll jump through that process. Of course, children are going to get into things. They're gonna learn. They're going to be curious. Music and dance, big part of their life. Uh, Easy way to teach them too, right? So not the terrible twos, but a wondrous stage. That's what we know this as. So we can jump on to the next one, Manisha. Yeah, so basically, from an indigenous perspective, talking gentle around the baby and mom from conception to seven, this was very important, um, because the child is able to hear everything around the womb, right? And so we knew to be gentle around the child, to be gentle around the home, to change our tone within that time frame, right? And continue that change when the baby comes, to always be gentle in those stages, right? Whereas, you talk aggressively, you talk mean, you talk angry, they're going to absorb that and they're going to naturalize it, right? So a lot of times when we look at the different the different I guess systems of law creation of law correction within our societies, from CFS to to what was the other word, from CFS to jails to different other systems of law correction. You see a lot of people in society um, going into these realms because a lot of times it's trauma, right? It's learned behaviors that they've normalized that may be negative, and not understanding and not knowing that they're negative um, has led them into these systems of law correction, right? And so that's the unfortunate thing about how crucial it can be um, if we're not conscious of how we talk to our children, our spouse, our family in those beginning stages, right? So it was so crucial. It was so crucial to speak kindness, to give foundational tools of support, so our children and our families can have positive learned behaviors, right? So support the wife around the house and assist with baby, chest to chest with the baby, build a bond. We know this as kangaroo care. I did this with all three of my children, and every time I had them, it was like the best time, right? Being really close to your child, but at the same time, with kangaroo care, they basically say that this helps the child develop, it helps the child grow, right? So, lots of foot rubs, household duties, patience, love, kindness, compassion, and champion every success of your child, right? Don't always coddle your children when they get hurt. Um, Help them through those processes, right? Learn to set limits with your children at these early stages. This can greatly affect their youth and adulthood, negative or positive, like we spoke. They are sponges in this time frame. And because they're sponges in this time frame, um, for indigenous peoples, it was important that as a community, as a collective, from conception to seven, we were always providing outlets of support, of learning, of growth within that time frame. Now, as you look at Western society, we already have we have a preschool, we have K4, we have K5, you have grade 1, grade 2. So already within that growth, there's already about anywhere from 4 to 5 years of school already happening from Western philosophy, um, a lot of times in indigenous communities. And so when that's happening, um, we find struggles to try to teach the children language now because they've already been influenced in those precious that precious time frame and that time gap. They've already been influenced from a different society's perspective, right? A different society's philosophies, and so when we look at parenting and a lot of parents that don't have these tools and don't know these tools, um, later on in life, they're trying to influence their children to comprehend this information, but a lot of times there's a big wall, right? There's a big gap, right? And so I guess that's the struggles a lot of times that you'll see within our own indigenous communities, but even in non-indigenous communities, when you're looking at a society as a whole, um, there's always those types of struggles, right? When a language base isn't the foundation of that identity of where those people come from, and if something else is taught to them, they're going to gravitate towards what they were taught as opposed to the knowledge of where they come from, right? So definitely a lot of talk around the education system about how we look at that, how we examine that, and what type of changes need to come into place, specifically dealing with children as a whole. um, those are some of the things that we've talked about over the years. I've sat on an education board for Musqueam Education Schools Commission, Definitely some things that we've examined and really tried to change our approach and how we educated our children during that time frame, right? So they were close to family, ceremony, culture, traditions, language spoken during this time frame. Because our children were considered angel-like in this time frame, we also taught them to communicate and valued their teachings during this time because we saw this as a direct message from our Creator. So, as the children were able to express and talk and communicate, um, because we had such a strong connection with them and the spirituality in that realm, um, once they got to the point where they could start asking questions and ask, well, why is this way? Why is this way? Um, we nurtured that. And as we nurtured that, sometimes they would share visions that they would have. And sometimes these visions would come true. And so, as we nurtured that, we nurtured the gifts that they were also bestowed upon as well, too, right? So, definitely insightful. We'll look on to the Western perspective. So physical development in infancy and toddlerhood, pediatric visits and specialist assessments. So with all three of my children, this was a pretty regular routine. Nutrition and growth, crucial in the first years. Breastfeeding in the first year, definitely crucial. Um, Crucial in Western and in Indigenous perspective. As early as 4 to 6 months, food can be introduced. Infant mortality, so sudden infant death syndrome. And so this is Western terminology, but definitely it's I believe that's why we said it was the angel-like stage, was that sometimes you believe that everything happens for a reason, and there's different terminologies to it. So that's where Western and Indigenous align, with this terminology. So malnutrition, growth faltering, failure to vaccinate, um, immu- imitation. So imitation's a big one during this stage. Uh, the children are just learning. They're sponges, and whatever they see, they're gonna try to emulate. They're gonna try to imitate as much as possible. Um, is so definitely so cute, um, but can also be very crucial in the child's development and growth, right? So again, like if they're around a negative environment, they're gonna imitate what they see. They're gonna react the same way, whether it's aggression, um, whether it's just, potentially a negative lifestyle. They're gonna try to imitate and normalize, what they're going through. But in the same sense, if it's a positive, positive learned behaviors, if it's a positive environment, the more supported and safe that environment is, they're going to imitate that, right? So habituation is where they start to learn song, sound, voice, breathing, and um, I think in the womb, to our understanding, that's when they really pick up on the sound, right? The tone of dad's voice, how dad talks, when dad sings, and so when you see the child comes out of the womb, right away they can identify, oh, this is my dad. This is his tone. This is how I feel around him. I feel safe around him. And so they're able to make that connection, right? So, and the same thing with their siblings, with their mother, they're able to see that, right, and make that connection. So classical conditioning, children's blue light, operant conditioning, sleep and brain development. Sleeping longer for babies is far more beneficial for development and can lessen as they get older. Gross motor development is the beginning stages. So that's when this is happening. Fine motor development, basically more detailed movements, biological influences on motor development, pattern versus term children. Um, and contextual influences on motor development, how they are engaged during growth. So I noticed I had it outlined that there was a treaty story in regards to failure to vaccinate. Um, So with all three of my children, they were preemies and needed that extra support, right? There was just something with my DNA and mom's DNA that just did not mix well, right? Mom was healthy, but every time we got to pregnancy point, um, basically having to deal with high blood pressure, right? And so preeclampsia was one of the things that we had to deal with on all three. So different forms and different levels of preeclampsia, from minor to very severe with all three. And so for me, I guess when we talk about the treaty story, how that aligns with all of this, um, and how important vaccination was, especially coming through this last little bit with COVID. Um, when we talk about treaty, there was ceremony that happened, and within that ceremony, items were shared. And so the items that were shared were there was two bundles. One bundle signified Western philosophy, and so it was understood in treaty negotiation when we talk about the medicine chest clause, uh, that there's that Western perspective of Western medicines, right? But there's also the second bundle, which was indigenous medicines, right? And so those two went hand in hand. Um, and the understanding was that in the future, if there's anything foreign that comes to our society, that there would be that support for our people, that they would have the ability to reach out to Western medicines to support them in case something is foreign that they can't cure through indigenous medicine. And so when we talk about when we talk about the medicine chest clause, it's an all-encompassing word. When you break down Cree words, they're not specific to just saying health. A Cree word will say, how do you get to health? What are all the key components in getting to health and that well-being? Well, you need food, right? You need shelter over your head. You need to be able to socialize. You need to be able to communicate, to educate, to have some sort of training as to how to get this food, or maybe it's education, maybe it's work, maybe it's having a job, maybe it's having income, maybe it's having support, maybe it's having food. So you think about all of those elements of what aid to a person's overall health and well-being. That's what we meant by medicine chest clause. When you break down those Cree terminologies, they're all encompassing holistic words that there's so much meaning attached to it as to why that what health means and all the avenues of health. And so health back then, what that meant is you had access to all of these different things that were going to benefit your health. You had access to transport to wherever you need to go. You had access to your food. You had access to your water, your medicines. Everything was right there. You had access to it. As you fast forward to where we're at today, there's limitations. You don't have access to certain things. So when you look at health and well-being today, you need to be able to have access to those things. So if you're secluded, if you're away from certain amenities that you need that are going to aid in your health and well-being, that's what the medicine chest means today. And so, we as a collective need to really understand that where Indigenous people are coming from, but those terminologies that today still protect Canada as a whole. And when we talk about treaty was vital to Canada's existence. Um, if treaty was not signed, the British Crown wouldn't have had a population to aid, to support, um, to show that this land base was claimed in support of the indigenous population. That the indigenous population were here. We honored their sovereignty, but we're going to ally them, and that's what I meant by not claim, but to ally the indigenous population that are here, So no other countries around the world can claim this territory as their own, and that's how vital the treaties were. And I think I needed to share that piece, because it's definitely important piece. You know, when we talk about vaccinations, um, so for me, having that understanding of knowing that my ancestors believe that in the future I might need help, my children might need help from Western medicine, that I need to be able to support that as an indigenous person, right? That if that's so be the situation, I need to be able to support that and go hand in hand with both ways, right? And so that was one crucial thing, that I had to experience with all three of my children. I needed that Western support, but at the same time too, I supported them on the cultural perspective, right? So the next one, yeah, Manisha, you can go to Black Elk Speaks. So Black Elk Speaks, definitely amazing book, a lot of knowledge from Black Elk. But I know in his book, he says, grown men can learn from very little children, for the hearts of little children are pure, and therefore the Great Spirit may show to them many things which older people miss. And that's such a big uh, statement that aligns with indigenous philosophy right across Turtle Island, especially in Plains Cree people, you know, have a strong belief in that. And that's why we say within that godlike stage, we tried to nurture them. We tried to teach them how to communicate. And so, um, you know, as you're raising your children and you take time to be compassionate, to be caring. These are great tools that are going to help you, as you continue to grow, as you continue to evolve, right? So they're going to teach you patience. They're going to teach you love, kindness, compassion, listening, being able to see the little details, being able to champion every success, right? So these are things that, you know, I believe make great human beings. And so our children are always teaching us. And so there's so much things that in society, as fast paced as it is, that we can lose sight of along the way, and our children are great reminders of that. So yeah, we can go to the next one. And so for me, as Manisha goes to the next one, this is basically why this topic is important to me and my children. My three little smiley faces. During the pandemic, all three of us, all four of us, we actually had to stay home. So my work, because it wasn't essential work, it wasn't frontline essential work, I had to stay home. But during this whole time, I'm kind of like, okay, well, they can't do nothing. And so this is where we actually started taking the lullaby and writing it out. And so as we would write it out, there's also story attached to the lullaby too. And so the children just got so much more fluent, and just it came to them naturally because they already knew the song. And so as they wrote the syllabics out, they were singing the song too. So yeah, definitely they all keep me going, and they are my foundation. So the next one we can jump to, um, is the syllabics chart. So on the left, you'll notice at the bottom right where there's a Y and there's a cross. Um, this, for the longest time, this was Plains Cree syllabics. However, I know at Musquechee's Cultural College, um, you know, this syllabics has continued to evolve, and not necessarily evolve, but how was understood through Plains Cree culture, traditional teachings, and the sharing of knowledge. Um, we actually came about it through the story of history creation, where it wasn't actually a cross, it was an X. And so on the right, you'll actually see uh, the the Plains Cree syllabics, you know. And so the reason why they are in the sky is because we believe that, um, in the sky, the certain constellations, there's a map, you know. And so within that map, it's also attached to the Plains Cree syllabics, right? And so, um, we know the Plains Cree syllabics as a star chart, pretty much is what it is. But at the same time, it's our language, right? And so it's all attached there. Um, when you look at, I want to say it might be Roman. Um, there's a different way they, I guess, write out this syllabics chart. I think it's the far left column is on the far right, and basically there's different characters mixed around, right? And so if you go in northern Alberta, you'll actually see those charts. Um, and there's two stories. One is that they say our language was never written, um, and that it was given to us, by our visitors. But the other side of it is we believe that our language was written, and that's where that connection to the stars comes into place. And so we had this understanding that our language was always written. The language was shared with our visitors, and there was changes made to it and taught back to us. But in that same aspect of when it was being taught back to us, it was outlawed to share ceremony, to share songs. So that's kind of the struggle that we've faced in Canada as a whole, in the early history. So as you look through each of these Plains Cree syllabics, we'll go down the first row on the far left. So it's a, ba, da, ga, cha, ma, na, sa, ya. They all have a sound, right? And then on the top row, the first four, this is our melody. It's a, e, o. And so the melody goes a, e, o. Then you go to the next row. Ba, baby, bo. Da, de, di, do. Ga, ke, ki, go. Cha, che, chi, cho. Ma, me, mo, na, ne, no. Sa, se, si, so. Ya, ye, ye, yo. And then the far right side, second row to the end, um, is the different sounds that you can actually start putting into the syllabics, right? So the first one with the two lines is H. So it's a H, and then P, D, K, Ch, M, N, S, Y. So you'll notice that there is no R's. The top right is W, and then OW. So those are the dots and the little O basically. And so let's say you're using the W sound. Um, it would come before the A on each column. So in the first column, it would obviously come before the A. In the second column, it will come before the A, but in between the P and the A. So for the A, it would go wa on the P sound, but it's more of a B sound. But on the B sound, you would put the W in there, so it would be like bwa, dwa, gwa, chwa, moi, noa, swa, ywa. And that's where that W sound comes in, right? And then that ow is at the end. So ow, ew, ew, oh, bow, bell, bew, bow. And it's kind of at the end, right? And then that H sound, so it goes ha, ba, da, ka, cha on that second column again. And you would use that with the syllabic. So you would say ah, or bah, dah, gah, jah. And then when you add that p sound, up, ape, eep, op, or else bop, dop, gop, jop, mop, nop, sop, yop. Or that t sound, right? Ot, bot, dot, got, jot, mot, not. And then you could just keep singing that song as you go through each of those sounds, right? So they change the way that syllabic sounds a little bit. just like the N sound, right? So it's like on, en, in, on, ban, bin, bin, bon, and you would add that sound, right? And so with the children, we would go through the syllabic sound, and then from there I'd go from the H sound, and I'd do it all over again. I'd go to the P, the P sound, the P, all over again, the T sound, the K sound, the Ch sound, sound, the sound, S sound, the W sound. And as difficult it was, you do the W sound, right? Or the W, or the ow, right? So that's pretty much how we would do the syllabics. And a lot of times they would fall asleep before I'm even done. Sometimes they would wait all the way till the end to do the whole entire process, right? And so just that repetition of that syllabic becomes ingrained in your child's mind at that development. So this was a crucial part of our language development. It is still a crucial part of our language development. It is a tool that we utilize in our home to show lullabies, but within singing that lullaby, it's also ceremony. It's praying for that child, but at the same time, giving that child that connection to the universe, to the star beings, right? And so, um, with that, that's pretty much the language portion of it. We can go on to it. If you have any questions or comments, that is pretty much the presentation today. I will do the reference really quick. Plains Creek Cultural Teachings from my father, Dr. Jerry Saddleback Sr., and the Plains Cree elders that he's visited over the years, as well as Black Elk Speaks by John G. and Black Elk, online dictionary for some of the Cree word terminologies. But yeah, that is the presentation. Hi, hi, Tamhin. Ekose, Manisha.
Thank you. Jerry, thank you so much for doing a fantastic presentation. And now I'm in the library. I had to move different, I had to be in different places. What questions do you have for Jerry?